PR Stoppers Talk Women Leaders, featuring Don Ray, Senior Vice President of Corporate and Brand Communications at Focus Brands. Here is our host, Doug Simon.
So Don, why don't you start by just giving folks a look at what are the brands associated with Focus Brand Company?
Yes, thank you so much, Doug, for having me. We have a lot of today's most iconic brands that you are used to seeing in the quick service restaurant space. On the restaurant side, Moe's Southwest Grill, known for their famous queso and like hand-rolled burritos, McAllister's Deli, and Schlotzsky's. On the other side, which is how we categorize our brands, we have specialty category. That is Annie Ann's, everyone's favorite pretzel, Jamba, Cinnabon, and Carvel ice cream. Carvel being one of the most iconic ice cream brands in America today.
Yeah, and we could do a whole conversation about our fond memories of those outlets, but since our goal is to help PR people do their jobs better, instead, why don't we start with your advice for women like yourselves who are in leadership positions in communications and for those who aspire to be?
You know, I've been thinking about this a lot lately, just as I joined Focus Brands during the middle of a pandemic. So I started in July, the end of July. We were in an interesting position in that we've never had a senior leader in communications before. Our CEO started 2 weeks before the pandemic really started to shut things down in the US. And, you know, I'm not going into an office every day. My team is not going into an office every day. How do we reorganize the communications team? And I really have been thinking a lot about this as we've restructured our team. And a lot of it is just having a mentor and a coach. And I do think mentor and coach are sort of different, right? And for women, I think it's really important to have some female role models. But the reality is, if you look at the senior leaders at a certain level and above in corporate America today, there are women, absolutely, but it's primarily men. And so you got to look for the right mentor and the right coach. And and no matter if it's men or women, I've been fortunate to have both in my life. From a male perspective, I've had people that have been really great coaches for me. And coaches meaning encouraging me, lifting me up, figuring out not just modeling good behavior, but helping me through a problem and not just giving me the answer.
Yeah, really, and with that definition of a coach, what would you say the difference is with a mentor compared to a coach?
Yeah, I think you need a coach and a mentor in your life. Sometimes they're one and the same. Sometimes they're two separate people. Sometimes there are various people in your lives that fill those roles. I think a coach really coaches you up. If you think about a sports analogy, right? A coach will really coach you up, tell you, sometimes they yell at you, sometimes they lift you up. It's just all part of it. They will help you get better. A mentor really models. You can look at a mentor and say, wow, you can see what their path was like. You can see their career trajectory. They may coach you along the way, but they can help you advance in your career more. So giving you some very tactical things to do to advance. They might be work at the same company. Frankly, that's what you should look for, is a mentor within your company that you aspire to be, like male or female, to help you get there. They may or may not be a coach for you to make you get better.
One of the things that's interesting about the challenges you face are communicating in a franchise business, especially in the time of COVID and the pandemic, in businesses that are public facing. How did you address some of those challenges? And let's take the franchise piece of that first, so people understand how to navigate some of those challenges. And then we can get specific about what you've done during the pandemic to maintain business.
Sure. I in a franchise environment, the end consumer or customer or guest, whichever industry or whatever moniker you call them, they don't care if it's if it's a McAllister's Deli, they don't really care if it's owned by XYZ Corporation and franchised out. It's a McAllister's Deli. So they want it to be the same or similar as the one. If they're traveling, they want it to be the same. If it's the one down their street, they're McAllister's, right? My McAllister's. or the one that they visit when they're an hour and a half, 2 hours away or wherever. With that comes some challenges, and frankly, there are legal challenges. So I think from a communications perspective, you have to be in sync with your legal team. And I spent a lot of my past career in hospitality and hotels. I worked at Hilton for 12 years. And I've always found that you've got to understand where the legal team is coming from, right? Your legal team is responsible for mitigating risk and making sure you're protected legally. A lot of times that's hard to translate into what real people and how real people think and communicate. So you sort of have to agree to meet in the middle and say, hey, legal, here's what I want to say. How can we say that? Or here's what we want to support this franchisee in a time of crisis. Because the reality is, at the end of the day, it's a Jamba. It's not the Jamba owned by Dawn Ray, right? Or the Jamba owned by Susan Smith.
Yeah, and there's an interesting challenge there as well, especially during the pandemic, as different states had different rules and regulations. So how did you navigate that during the pandemic as it still continues, and hopefully as things start to open up with the distribution of the vaccine?
Yeah, our company was really aligned. We had to get aligned across all brands. If one brand was experiencing something, chances are the other brands were experiencing it as well. And what we were able to do is we used a lot of our time, our legal team and some outside counsel really we set up a lot of webinars, a lot of tools and resources to help them navigate ever changing. Sometimes it's changing by the hour, right? It's scary to think, or it's interesting to think now, 12 months later, that there were some things that weren't happening in a restaurant or a place of business that now just seem normal, right? Everyone's wearing masks and gloves. You're not like crowding on top of each other. Social distancing, those words that social distancing didn't even exist, that word or phrase. Right. So we sort of were helping them interpret based on their state or municipality, what the rules and regulations were. Another thing is if I look back at my career, this has been probably through 9/11 and some other really challenging weather issues and so forth. This has probably been the most challenging crisis that we as communications people have ever been through. And I think I'm sorry.
So I was going to just jump in and say, for organizations, a lot of times they've thought of reorganizing during this time because so much has changed. And you've taken the step towards centralizing leadership. What's some of your advice and takeaways there on how best to go on a path to centralized leadership? Because sometimes there can be resistance, especially if you've got a corporate parent with many well-known brands.
I think it was a lot easier to centralize in a COVID environment. And let me tell you why. We had not been centralized for a long time. And centralized is not a bad word. Sometimes it is. And you sort of have to, work your way around it and message that it's efficiencies and being more effective and using economies of scale. That's where we really saw a huge difference, is economies of scale. Because again, if one brand was experiencing it, all of our brands were. They may have been slightly different in a certain state or municipality, but trust me, all the Annie Ann's that are located in malls and all the Cinnabons that are located in malls were kind of in the same boat, because no one was going to malls and malls were shutting down. So we found that centralizing and having one message was the way to go, particularly as it relates to COVID. Now, on some other sort of like lighter issues, I'd say you do have some nuances there, but I always use the example of, if we're sending out a PPE message to one brand, we're really sending it out to all brands. So we shouldn't replicate that message 7 times. It's really one message, right? There's a supply chain issue with certain PPE. That was a nationwide issue, right? It wasn't just that wasn't just a Jamba issue in this part of California. It was an issue across all of our brands. So to be more efficient and more effective, it made more sense to centralize a lot of that. Also, a lot of that came from a new CEO who's joined us in the end of February. So he's been here right about a year now. What a time to join a company, right? A couple of weeks before your company shuts down, and you have to figure out how to keep people's jobs, how to keep stores open that are in places where they can remain open, stores and restaurants, and how do you make your franchisees profitable? So, we found that centralizing, this is a cliche, and I don't like using cliches, but my husband tells me I use a lot of them. The whole is greater than the sum of its parts. And in this instance, in terms of COVID, it is. It's just a lot easier and a lot more efficient and effective to do it from a centralized location. There are some nuances. If you're about 85% of the way there, right? 90%, that other 10 to 15% you can nuance.
Great. And just as we close, given that it is Women's History Month, any final thoughts to women who really aspire to leadership? What's your best advice for them to go forward and achieve?
I think it's finding the right mentor or coach to help you through what you want to do. It's always being willing to do some of the things that nobody else wants to do, or to do what you're asked to do. You never know where it may lead. I truly am in this role based on my previous experience. I've worked with our CEO before, and it truly was hey, I'm going to invite you to this meeting. He's been one of the best mentors and coaches, frankly, in my life, in my career. But it truly was hey, as you're learning this new brand, when I started working at Hilton, come to this meeting, and I want you to just sort of, you'll see a lot of learning. What developed from that one meeting was a very rich career with supporting him in various communications roles as he moved through the ranks at Hilton. And then later he became a CEO and brought me on as his, and I've been away. We haven't worked together in 6 years. We kept in touch, but it was just knowing you can do the things that someone relies on you to do, and seeing that potential in you and watching it grow. I think you have to be comfortable with the uncomfortable. I tell my team that a lot. Sometimes things, particularly change, is a little bit uncomfortable. So we have to be uncomfortable, or we have to be comfortable with the uncomfortable in order to move forward. I am a black and white person as well, meaning I don't like to operate in the gray space. However, the nature of communications and public relations, particularly strategic communications, is sometimes there's a lot of gray, and you got to be comfortable operating in the gray. And I always tell my team, if we can get it to 85%, where it's black or white, right? It's one way, that 10 to 15% is the gray area, and we can operate in that.
That's some great advice. And one of the things I'm taking away that I think applies regardless of your gender, ethnicity, et cetera, is like seizing those key moments of opportunity. That's as right. You did when you went to that meeting, because sometimes they're going to come. It might be a senior person leaves the company for a different opportunity. There's a reorganization, or even a situation like the pandemic where there's change in the air, and being able to be an incredibly valuable resource at those moments of opportunity and times of change can really help propel you forward. And Dawn, it's been such a pleasure talking with you and hearing your advice. Thanks so much, and continued success for you and your team. And hopefully I'll be hitting Auntie Anne's, Cinnabon, or Carvel, which are three of my favorites that you rattled off, pretty soon.
Thank you, Doug. I hope you get some Auntie Anne's, Cinnabon, or Moe's next time.
Yeah, heading that way. Thanks again.
Thank you.